Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at what happens after the smoke clears from a massive explosion at a U.S. bomb factory. And, this story starts with a really sudden, violent tragedy, but it opens up a much longer, much slower crisis, one that's been unfolding in America's own soil and water for decades. Just imagine saying that. This was the awful realization of a worker who had just clocked out, minutes before a catastrophic blast hit his plant in Tennessee. He was already home when his phone started blowing up with calls from friends, all asking him the same terrifying question: was he still alive? His words are just chilling. He said his heart just sunk. 18. That's the number of people reported missing and feared dead after the explosion. Aerial photos just showed nothing. Smoldering rubble where a factory used to be. The local sheriff, he summed it up with one devastating phrase: it's gone. So this tragedy in Tennessee, it's our starting point, but really it's a doorway into a much, much bigger story. The materials that are made in these plants, well, they have a history that's completely tangled up with American military power, but also with these hidden dangers that stick around long after the weapons are ever built. If you look at the company's website, it talks about an 8-building facility that makes and tests explosives for the U.S. military. So that begs the question: what exactly are these incredibly powerful materials, and what kind of risks have been built into them from the very, very beginning? To really understand what happened in Tennessee, we have to rewind the clock. We've got to go back to the pressure cooker of World War II. This was a time when the race for more powerful weapons led to a chemical breakthrough that would literally change warfare forever. The scientific name for these things is energetic materials, and really, you can think of them as the chemical engines of our modern military. They provide the raw force for everything, from tiny bullets and big artillery shells to massive rockets and bombs. And they work by unleashing just an incredible amount of heat and gas in a split second. Now, for the first half of the 20th century, TNT was king. It was the go-to military explosive. But during World War II, this new compound came on the scene and changed everything. It was called RDX, which stands for Research Department Explosive, and it was a genuine super explosive, 1.5 times more powerful than TNT. It was absolutely critical to the Allied victory. In 1941, American chemists cracked the code for how to mass-produce this stuff, which allowed the U.S. to churn out 500 tons of it a day. So for over 75 years now, RDX has been this mighty instrument of American military power. And get this, its production has been centered right there in Tennessee at the Holston Army Ammunition Plant, which is not far at all from the site of that tragic blast. But the incredible power of these explosives has always come at a steep human price. And that price isn't just paid on the battlefield. It's also paid right there on the factory floor. 17,000. That's how many cases of TNT poisoning were recorded among U.S. workers during World War I, and this was long before RDX even existed. That toxic exposure alone, it led to more than 475 deaths. Yeah, historical records, they paint a really grim picture. Ammunition plants were just some of the most dangerous places you could work. People were handling these dusty, fuming compounds every single day, and it led to this whole host of devastating health problems. I mean, everything from fatal aplastic anemia, where your body literally just stops making blood cells, to severe seizures caused by that powerful new explosive, RDX. And don't think for a second that this is all just ancient history. This shows that the danger isn't just the risk of a huge, catastrophic explosion. It's also the slow, toxic exposure to the chemicals themselves. We saw American soldiers in Vietnam and factory workers back home both suffering seizures from RDX. This is a persistent danger of the job. And, this toxic legacy, it has a second life. It's a life that begins after the explosives leave the factory. Because the very same chemical properties that make RDX such a powerful weapon also make it a really persistent pollutant, one that seeps quietly into the American homeland. For decades, the wastewater from these plants, this telltale frothy pink mixture, was just dumped, poured into unlined pits and ditches. The big problem here is that RDX is unusually persistent, and it's very mobile in water. It doesn't really dilute or break down easily, which allows it to stay concentrated and just travel for miles and miles underground. So let's look at exactly how this contamination travels. A lawsuit out in Mapleton, Utah laid out the exact pathway. First, waste from an explosives plant seeped into a local irrigation canal. Then, that canal polluted the whole community's aquifer, their underground water source. And from there, the chemicals went right into people's taps and into the soil of their own home gardens. Now, here's where it gets even more alarming. RDX doesn't just stay RDX. As it breaks down out there in the environment, it can actually morph into new chemicals, like nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are a family of some of the most potent cancer-causing agents known to science. So, in a way, the poison becomes even more poisonous over time. That lawsuit back in Mapleton alleged that all this contamination led to a cancer cluster. And experts in the case testified that eating vegetables like carrots or spinach grown with this contaminated water was especially dangerous. Why? Because the plants can actually absorb and concentrate the chemicals, which could amplify a person's exposure by more than 280 times compared to just drinking the water. And look, this isn't just a story about old, leaky factories from decades ago. In the 1990s, an active military firing range on Cape Cod was found to be polluting the one and only source of drinking water for over 500,000 people. This just goes to show you that the problem is also created by the ongoing training that's required for military readiness, which, as you can imagine, sets up a major conflict. The explosion in Tennessee, it's really just the latest, most violent chapter in a story that's defined by this constant, difficult trade-off. The need to protect the nation versus the need to protect the nation's own environment and its own citizens from the very tools of that protection. According to one of the EPA's foremost authorities on this topic, cleaning up RDX contamination at military sites has been the single biggest challenge for his office. For decades, a battle has been raging behind the scenes between the EPA, whose job it is to protect public health, and the Pentagon. So the Department of Defense has consistently fought to limit its liability. The core of its argument is that strict environmental rules and really costly cleanups can interfere with readiness. That's the military's ability to train and prepare for combat. Over the years, they've sought exemptions from major environmental laws and even funded their own research that, well, often concludes RDX is less dangerous than EPA scientists believe. And this whole fight really came to a head over one question. How do you classify the cancer risk of RDX? Based on early animal studies that showed liver and lung tumors, the EPA was ready to call it a likely human carcinogen, and that classification triggers much stricter regulations. But after years of pressure and a wave of Pentagon-funded studies that raised doubts, the EPA adopted a weaker standard, suggestive of carcinogenicity. Critics basically argue that this decision protects the polluters more than it protects people. So at the end of the day, the explosion in Tennessee, the cancers in Utah, the poisoned water on Cape Cod, they're all consequences of a really difficult national choice. The very materials that were designed to keep the country safe abroad have created this toxic legacy right here at home, leaving all of us with a final vital question that we still haven't really figured out how to answer.